Watch this. One small change in where you contact the ball turns a weak push into a devastating chop long that catches your opponent off guard.
更好的
Hi
球门。
everyone, let's get started. Today I'm going to teach you 3 essential techniques for handling forehand short balls: long push, push flick, and push poke. In a real match, your opponent will constantly send short balls to your forehand side, so you need reliable answers for every one of them. Let's begin with the long push. The first key point is this: when you chop the ball long, you absolutely must make contact on the lower half of the ball. Find that bottom portion. That's where your racket needs to bite to generate real backspin.
沙哑哟，对，劈长的第一个关键点呢，就是大家一定要把这个球啊，给我一个球，一定要找到这个球的这个下半部。其实
The
我们
reason
大部
most
分
players can't execute a good long push, or the ball flies off the end of the table, is that the racket face is too flat. When you push with a flat racket, you strike the very bottom of the ball and send it forward, so it travels too long. What you want instead is a downward digging action. The ball should dive down after crossing the net. To get that feeling, you must apply force at the moment of contact. And the key to that is raising your hand high.
到球这一下，
If the ball bounces to this height, your hand needs to be up here, above the ball.
要拿高。
Watch as I demonstrate a couple.
球体跳这么高，那么我的手就要拿到这个位置。我给大家搓两个，大家看啊，因为新球，大家看一下，
Watch closely, I raise my hand, and notice exactly where the ball meets the racket.
高一点。
It's striking the lower half of the racket face every single time. The contact point is down near the bottom edge, not the center. That's what gives the stroke its bite. The racket angle stays slightly open, brushing under the ball with a firm downward trajectory. So remember, the first key point is always contact on the lower portion of the racket face.
对不对？在球拍的下半部，所以第一个关键
When you
点呢，就是
execute the
我们
long
搓球的
push,
时
you
候
must raise your hand up.
把手
This is absolutely critical. Watch the ball bounce. As it rises, I position my hand above it and contact the lower half of the ball.
就是你看，
This is how you generate that downward diving quality. The force point is at the racket head, right here at the tip. That's where the acceleration happens. You must lift your hand up to this level. If you don't raise it, the ball won't dive down after the net. It will just travel forward flat.
点在拍头上，
So get that hand up every single time.
发力点是在拍头上。那么我们一定要把这个手拿起来。你如果不拿起来，这个球你肯定劈下去的球不是往下扎的，而是往前走的。对，大家中午好啊。它一定是
The
往
ball
前
will
走
only
的。
travel flat and forward if your hand stays low.
手一定
So when you push, you must lift your hand, raise the elbow and shoulder, setting up like a platform above the ball.
起来，就像我今天
Watch how my elbow and shoulder are elevated.
的时候，
I'm bringing the racket up first, then chopping downward.
它是把手
See the motion: lift, 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 then cut down through the ball. Only when your hand starts high can you turn the racket face over and slice underneath. If you can't get the hand up, you have no downward angle, and the ball just slides forward with no bite. This is the first key point for every long push.
拿起来，我们才能向下翻，才能向下去切。你只要拿不起来这个球，你只能去往前走，能理解吗，球友们？哎，这是第一关键点。关键点呢，就是大家
Next,
一
you
定要
must use the
利用
racket head. Honestly, I think the reason my loops carry so much spin, the reason my serves are so heavy, is that I use the racket head extremely well. The direction the racket head points matters enormously. If you push the ball with the center of the racket, you get very little spin. The racket head must accelerate. Watch this whipping motion. The faster the racket head swings, the more spin you generate. See how it almost grazes the table surface.
拍头一定要
Don't be afraid of that, even I clip the table sometimes. The racket head must point toward the table at the moment of contact. Watch as my partner feeds the ball. When the racket head aims down toward the table surface through contact, the ball comes off with heavy backspin and dives sharply.
拍头的指
The direction of the racket head is the single most important factor in a spinny long push.
头的指
Remember that.
一定要，这个叫看镜啊。推撇是什
Now,
么呢？
now
你
let's
给我
talk
发
about the push flick. My partner sends a short ball to my forehand. We just covered the long push, now watch the push flick. This ball is extremely uncomfortable for the opponent. Why? First, it carries light backspin. Second, it has speed. And third, it floats. It has a wobbly, drifting trajectory that's very hard to read. Watch as I flick one over, see how it drifts and floats. When you add more speed, the effect becomes even more pronounced.
你给我踩坏了一个，来，你再发。我如果把速度撇出来，就会更快了。推
Where
铁
is the
的
key
重要
point
关
for the
键
push
点在
flick?
哪儿？第一个，
First, the racket angle must not be too flat. If it's too flat, the ball pops up high. Think of a clock face on the ball. This is the 3 o'clock position. For a normal forehand drive, you'd contact at 3 o'clock. But for the push flick, you adjust the racket angle to 4 o'clock. Tilt it from 3 down to 4. That becomes your base angle, the position your racket holds from setup all the way through the finish.
把拍形
Second key point, does the wrist move during the push flick?
拍形3点、4点，调整到4点钟的拍形，作为我们的先不用发基础到最后停止的动作。第二个关键点，手腕动不动？推挑。
Then now let's look at the push poke. Here's the question, does the push poke use the wrist? A regular flick does use the wrist, watch this. My partner feeds a short ball, and on a normal flick I snap the wrist through contact to generate spin and speed. You can see the wrist turning over, but the push poke is different. On the push poke, the wrist stays locked. You hold the racket angle firm, and instead of flicking the wrist, you simply drive the forearm straight forward, pushing through the ball. The wrist must stay open and stable throughout the stroke.
手腕的，对吧？往中间发一点，那边看不着。就这个，看，挑球是用手腕的。那么，如果你推挑呢，它是不用手腕的，顶住以后，前臂往前推。什么叫
So what
推挑
exactly
呢？
is a push poke?
顶住以后，
You lock the wrist in place and push forward with the forearm. Watch how professional players use this tactic all the time. In doubles especially, when the opponent drops a short ball, the receiver steps in and notice there's no wrist snap. A real flick looks like this, with the wrist turning over. But on the push poke, the racket angle stays fixed, the racket stays pressed down, and the forearm drives forward. The ball comes off with sidespin topspin, and it's incredibly consistent, one push, one winner. The wrist does not move.
动手腕的，你正常的挑球是需要动手腕的。
A regular flick does require wrist rotation, that's the key difference. With the push poke, your wrist stays locked forward, pressing ahead. The forearm drives straight out, staying close to the ball and pushes through. That's the push poke. And then there's the long push, where you do turn the racket head over, cutting underneath the ball. The push poke itself produces sidespin topspin, so it's not going to dump into the net. The biggest advantage of the push poke is deception. The downside, it's not as fast as a full flick, but the consistency is far superior because your wrist isn't moving.
别人，就是能晃到对方，最大的好处就是这样。它的缺点是什么呢？它没有挑球的速度快，但是呢稳定性强，因为你手腕是不动的，相当于对方给你的侧上，你给它压着压回去了。明白了吧？我站正面给大家送几个。
So remember the 3 techniques and what makes each one different. Keep your hand high, that's the first key. Second, your fingers drive the wrist through friction. Third, when you push, use that short, snappy force from the fingers to make the racket head rotate.